Hello, everybody. We're going to be talking about my fancy at-home video studio today. So I'm so psyched. I've been going to MinneBar for many years. This is the first time I've been presenting. So thanks for joining the session here. So I'm going to get right to it. When I first did this trial, like when I first ran this thing and timed it, I was at 43 minutes. So I've got to cut a lot of it out and go a little bit faster. So you can toss some questions in there, but I might not be able to get to them. I have my LinkedIn profile in the presentation as well. If you want to ask me questions there, happy to answer them. So get my clicker working here. So what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about introduction and disclaimers, talk about a few different things with that. Where to set up your studio space, cameras, lenses, and capture cards, microphones and audio, and lighting and set. We're going to try and cover all of those things. So a little bit about me. So I work primarily as a consultant for like marketing technology kind of stuff. So bridging the gap between IT and marketing. Because of that, I started doing some classes and teaching at Normandale Community College. And along with all of that, I kind of had to set up a home video studio. So it kind of all factors in. It's really nice. It's a good flex in conference calls. I'm going to be really honest about that. I've gotten a lot of compliments from clients about having a nice setup. And so it's kind of nice. I kind of like it. So if you want to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, that's totally cool. You can ask questions and love to chat. Full disclaimers. I don't have any affiliate links in here. I think that would be super lame. So these are just, if there are links to products in here, they're not affiliate links. It's just links to Amazon and B&H Photo mostly. Not getting any money for that. Also, that's not always the case when you read help articles online for this kind of stuff. So be wary when you're trying to find like how-tos on how to set this kind of stuff up. It's not uncommon for them to be kind of skewed. So just be aware of that. This does take a lot of time and can be a money pit. Don't go out and spend a ton of money without doing a bunch of research first. But if you're careful about it, it can be fairly cost effective. This is not your like lowest budget video studio. This is to get it to be really pretty fancy. So there's a budget build with that, but it's still a little more than you might expect. There's a ton more to learn about this than what I know. I've been doing research on it for a long time, but I'm not the foremost expert on it. If there's any audio video nerds in the session today, I apologize if I say things that are incorrect. I will do my best. But if you have any clarifications you want to throw in there, I totally appreciate it. And it might not work the first time, great. I've struggled with audio issues. There's still some audio issues that I have. So, you can just keep trying and eventually you'll get it to work pretty well. So for any photos I have in here, I was never expecting to really show anyone. They were kind of for my own documentation. I'm making weird faces and I have terrible hair in a lot of them. So just fair warning. Also, please don't rob me. All this equipment and studio stuff is worth less than a typical MacBook. All my stuff's kind of old, but it works well for me. So just please don't rob my house. I'd appreciate that. It's also messy. I thought I would have way more time to clean before MinneBar, and I totally didn't. But what's great about the video studio is that it doesn't matter that it's messy because what's in frame here is nice and clean. Look how nice this looks. It's really looks nice and shiny. So that's okay. All right, so where to build your studio space. So something to factor in is acoustics. So some bad qualities to avoid or things you'll have to fix. Brick or cinder block walls, cement floors, utilities in the room, floors above you, adjacent to noise making. So if there's other stuff going on, for example, my neighbor's dogs will sometimes bark and that can get picked up by my microphone. Unfinished ceilings can be kind of bad. Good qualities to look for. If you have a room with drop ceilings, that's awesome. They have those, usually those drop ceiling panels are acoustic panels and can dampen some noise. Carpeted floors are awesome. They work really well. Drywall is better than cement and cinder block. If you can find something that's distant from living areas and areas that make a lot of noise, that'd be beneficial. If you live in the 70s and have carpeted walls and ceilings, that's rad too. Maybe you don't want to do the remodel in your Rambler, but leave the carpeted wall and ceiling room. That would help a lot for noise dampening. If you don't have a 70s house, you can fix the bad acoustics with a couple different techniques. If you have brick or cinder block walls, you can hang rugs or sleeping bags or blankets on the walls. You can put a rug down on the floor for your cement floor. You can ask people kindly not to use utilities as much while you're doing recording. For example, there's a water heater behind my camera, and if people in my house take a shower while I'm recording, that turns on and makes some bubbly popping noises, which maybe is bad for that. But so I ask them not to do that while I'm recording very nicely. If there's floors above, maybe ask people not to walk around as much while you're recording. And if you're adjacent to noise making, maybe ask people to just not be home if you have a lot of that. It's not exactly something that you can do, but it's really kind of one of the only options if you have really noise, if you have kids or dogs or people just walking around a lot and you have video recording you have to do, you might need to just be like, hey, can you leave for a bit? Be helpful. So this is a panoramic shot of my studio from a couple of months ago. I took all of this down for now. I should probably put it back up before I do any series recording. But you're seeing a lot of sleeping bags. I like to go camping, and I like winter camping because I have really big, fluffy sleeping bags. And there's one on the ceiling. There's a bunch on the walls. On the left-hand side, there's a big area rug on on a brick wall. And there's about a 2-inch gap between the brick wall and the rug, which helps for that acoustics. There's also some acoustic panels that you can see. Sometimes Axeman sells those for fairly cheap. This is another good thing to look for on Craigslist because people get into podcasting and then they get out of podcasting and they sell their acoustic panels, and you can usually find them fairly cheap. I also have acoustic panels above me over here. They're not really placed correctly. I moved my desk forward fairly recently, so they're not doing a great job, but I might move them forward after a bit. You can also see the rug there. And I have had to, when I do teaching and I have to do some serious recording, I have to ask my wife to leave the house or maybe just be really quiet, which is kind of lame, but that's what you got to do to get the sound to work right. Room availability. So if you have a place where you can permanently set up your studio, that makes the world of difference. It takes a lot of time to set up and tear down, and a lot of fiddling around. And there's lots of the more you unplug and plug stuff back in, if you do that a ton, you might wear stuff down. I don't know. But the more you have it permanently set up, the easier it is to just sit down and use the studio. You can also get a semi-permanent setup by maybe taping spots where your tripods go and trying to work out a system and practice setting up and tearing down. That can work okay. And you can set up a completely mobile setup as well. I use this from going on site with clients. I've done a little bit of AV stuff for clients. And you can get a mobile setup that works okay, such as this. I'm using, these are my same lights I'm using in this studio, but I brought them along to a client. And then I'm using a pop-up background, and it's just leaning against a wall. Also, don't do this. Don't hang your AC adapters in midair. That's not good. Room shape. Room shape is important. If you have a long and narrow room, that's a much better scenario than having a square room. So my first studio that I set up was in a small duplex in South Minneapolis, and I had a 10 by 11 office, and it was rough setting up that studio. It was very disheartening because I wanted to do a project where I recorded video, and I kind of had to cancel the whole thing because it just was not looking great. So here you can see kind of what the shot looks like. Mass loaded vinyl, yeah. So that's good for sound dampening, yeah, absolutely. And they sell tubes of stuff too. You can build. There are a zillion tutorials on how to build acoustic panels, and it's totally a rabbit hole that I love diving into. So have fun with that. But yeah, good suggestion. So this is the studio that I first had. It was a really small space, but it was an apartment. So what do? I kind of felt like I had a racer head hair here. I'll come back to this and talk about the lights and the backdrop here in a little bit. Here's kind of what I had the setup built out as. So we had a 12 by 10 foot room, and I actually had to have the camera set up in the hallway in front of the bathroom in order to get the shot long enough based on the lens that I was using, which was meant it was not permanent or even really semi-permanent. It could maybe stay there for a weekend. That's it. So comparing that to my current setup, which is in the basement of my house, and it's, this is basically uses up the whole basement. It's taking up the whole thing. And it allows us to get much better shots, and it's a lot more comfortable. The lighting is a lot easier to set up. It's just significantly better to have the long, narrow room. So for some measurements for this room, it's a 28-foot room, 12 feet wide, and I'm 10 feet from the camera and 10 feet from the background. And that allows me to have a set of lights right here. So there's some lights here. And then there's a set of lights behind me for lighting up the backdrop, which makes a big difference for having it look reasonable. Also, that distance, we're going to talk about depth of field in a little bit. That's what gives us this nice blurry background, which looks really slick, is the space between me and the backdrop. So better depth of field, better lighting options. It really just looks a lot better to have the larger space. I know that's not an option for everyone, and I know that's kind of a bummer. We'll talk about some other options for backdrops and things you can try to do if you have a smaller space. If you have the availability, use the longer, narrow room, and maybe don't finish that basement and turn it into a studio instead. So cameras, lenses, and capture cards. So lenses, and thing to know about lenses. The smaller the number on the focal length, which is the millimeters reading on the lens, the wider the angle, the larger the number, the more telephoto. Your sensor size for your camera is kind of a multiplier for what the actual focal length is. This gets into a totally nerdy photography topic, which I love talking about, but we don't have enough time. This is just an example of, and I'll hide my face here for a second so you can see the photo credit. So this showcases the depth of field. So you see when it goes to 20 millimeters, his nose is quite enlarged, and his face kind of looks, it's kind of more of a shark. He's more of a shark face kind of thing going on with that, which is a mean thing to say, but that's just what the lens is doing. So you can see the comparisons here, 20 millimeters versus 35 millimeters versus 85 millimeters. It really changes the shape of his face. If you get too telephoto, the number gets too large, you're going to end up adding some extra pounds from the camera, and it's going to not look quite as good. So somewhere between 50 and 85 is kind of the sweet spot that I like. But I think I kind of have a bit of a round face, so maybe I should go a little bit lower even than that. But yeah, it's something to watch out for. With any wide angle lenses, anything that's closer to the camera is going to be distortedly larger, like your nose. So just be aware of that. Here are the two different shots. These are some of the numbers that we ended up at for these. So basically what I'm using right now is equivalent to a, thank you. Thanks, Adil. Lost train of thought, but 85 millimeters is what I'm using right now with this setup, and I think it looks good. So the other one is a little bit too wide angle. So fixed prime lenses versus telephoto lenses. Right now we're using a prime lens. This is actually the lens that we're using on the left-hand side, the 42.5. That's what I'm shooting with right now. And the thing with these is that they're going to be giving you a sharper image. It's going to look better. You're going to have smaller aperture numbers, which gives you better depth of field and blurriness background kind of stuff. They just look sharper. They look a lot better. It's going to be harder to do if you have a limited amount of space, though. The only reason why I can really get away with this prime lens is because I have a whole basement to use. If you have a smaller amount of space or something that where you need to change your location a lot, go with a telephoto lens. The other benefit to a telephoto lens, which basically means that you can zoom in and out by twisting the ring, is that usually they come with your camera. So you can, if you buy a camera kit, you can get it. You'll probably get a kit lens, they call them, and you don't have to buy another lens, and it's probably going to be fine for you. If you want to get really nerdy and get a prime lens, that's awesome, but your normal telephoto should work fine. Yeah, smaller the number on the aperture, easier to just get a blurry background. So this is another kind of nerdy tool, which is super fun. This is the depth of field calculator. So I put a link to it in the presentation. And I think I shared the presentation URL with MinneStar a little bit ago. If they could post that in chat, that'd be awesome, if they haven't already. So you can find links to this stuff in that presentation. But this kind of shows you kind of what it's going to look like based on the different focal length of the lens and your space between the subject and the background of the camera. So cameras. Two different kind of camera body styles you can play with. You have DSLRs and mirrorless. One is not necessarily better than the other. The mirrorless market is really competitive right now. I decided to switch from DSLRs to mirrorless, but it's something that once you choose, this is the important piece with your camera body, is that once you choose a certain kind of camera body, just stick with that format for a long time. So I chose to go with the Panasonic Lumix cameras, which we'll talk about in a moment, which are Micro Four Thirds. I'm going to stick with that for a while until I'm like, you know what, I'm done with Micro Four Thirds, and then I'm probably going to sell all of my stuff and go to a different camera lens mount. So that makes a big difference. You want to just stick with the same kind of mount. Sensor size is also another important thing. So large sensors are really nice. They're good for low light. They really increase the cost of your setup. So there's a lot of people who do this kind of setup with like a Sony A7 camera, A7, whatever, there's a bunch of them. But going that route is going to cost you like $2,500 more just to go with that setup. Larger sensor does mean a lower crop factor, which gives you better low light images and a better depth of field. But really only splurge for this if you're also going to use that camera setup or that camera setup or that system for doing photography. If you're going to be doing photography like headshots or landscape or anything like that, any kind of other photography stuff, maybe go for a full frame. But for the video stuff, if you have lights especially, you don't really need it. This is a fun graph that we don't have time to talk about, talking about sensor size. I'm going to go into my picks for cameras, and these slides I noticed last night are a little out of order, but I forgot to change them, so we're going to roll with it. My favorite that we're using right now is a Panasonic G85. So it's $700 for the kit on B&H Photo. And you can get them cheaper on eBay, or sometimes the stuff is on Craigslist if you can get it faster than me. But it's a good camera. And for a lot of these cameras, these Panasonic lines are really, they're very similar. There's just a few differences between them, which is really nice because then you can use multiples in a setting and not have it be too weird. So these lenses are fairly cheap, and by cheap I mean like $300 to $500 as opposed to $600 to $900. You can usually find these used for like $400 or so. I picked up one on Craigslist for $350. And they handle HDMI video output well, which is important for what we're doing. They have a nice UI. It has a mic input. There's aftermarket accessories available. Does not have a dedicated headphone port, which is kind of bad if you're on location. The autofocus isn't perfect, and it's not great in low light. The thing about autofocus is that none of these autofocuses are going to be great. Some of them get pretty close, but if you're doing this, like we're in manual focus right now, because if we were in autofocus with any of the cameras that are on the market, there's a good chance that when I do something like this, where I gesture close to the camera, it'll pick up on my hand and try to bridge the gap on the focus, and it'll mess something up. So we are at 5 minutes, so I'm going to jump through this. So other good cameras that are very similar, the GH4. GH4 is good if you're going to be on location, also Craigslistable. The one that I recommend for the bargain bin for the more of a budget build is the GX85, which is what we have for this camera that's up here. This is the GX85. I use this for demonstrations when I'm showcasing stuff. So it's kind of fun to have that. It works just as well. The images are going to look exactly the same as the other cameras. This does not have a mic input, so you can't use it on location really at all. It's only for this kind of studio setup because my microphone goes directly to my computer. You need to get AC adapters. You don't want to run anything off of batteries as you're doing this because it just takes a long time. You're going to kill your batteries just trying to get set up. So make sure to get an AC adapter. When you're shopping for cameras and stuff, go to, oh, I forgot to switch back to that. Key things to look for, just look for microphone ports, HDMI outputs, and AC adapter availability. Read up on stuff on dpreview.com. It's a great site that's where I go for all my camera knowledge. You need to get an Elgato capture card. So this is an HDMI card. So it takes HDMI out from your camera and converts it into basically a webcam input, and that's what I'm using here. So I have 2 Elgatos. One of mine that I have is a PCI Express card. The other one is like a USB-C card. That's how I can have 2 displays. Don't buy other brands, really. I've tried a couple other ones and they just didn't work, or they were really slow in rendering, which messed up the timing for audio and video. For software, you're going to want to check out Open Broadcaster software, OBS. It's an open source piece of software, and it's really good. It's good, but it is hard. There's a lot of stuff to learn about it. I'm not very good at it. So, but this is how I have all these fun camera angles, and I can do this kind of stuff, and we can, showcase different things. So I'm using all of that through OBS. I'm also using OBS Virtual Camera, which allows me to broadcast to what we are seeing right now. So this tricks my computer into thinking that that OBS is a webcam, and so you can use that for inputs for Zoom, for Google Meet, for anything that uses a webcam. You can also set up something that I need to do is set up virtual audio cables, which I have not done yet, which I'm probably going to try and do this weekend, which I just found out about yesterday. Microphones and audio. So there's lapel mics or lavalier microphones, Carter Rudd microphones, and condensers, omnidirectional mics, and shotgun mics. I'd recommend buying from B&H Photo because there's some counterfeits that have shown up on Amazon. So I trust B&H a little bit more. I'm using like a $100 Amazon one. You can try it out. I don't really like it a ton, but it's working okay. I went with a shotgun mic because I wanted it out of frame. You can use like a voiceover mic, which is like the Shure podcast. Oh, only 1 minute. Okay, and get really fast. So get a shotgun mic. I don't really like lavaliers. They get in the way. I use an audio mixer to get my gain on my audio so that you can actually hear me. Extras you might need, some audio cables, that kind of fun stuff. Lighting and set, go with LED panels as opposed to CFLs. I'm using that shotgun mic that's linked in the presentation that says currently my favorite. Don't get the CFLs, they're kind of a pain. I've had them before, I don't like them. Here's my light setup with links. You can also use just like shop lights, work pretty well. For backdrops, these collapsible backgrounds are awesome. I like bringing them on location, and they work great, and they're nice and taut. They don't have any wrinkles. If you're going to use fabric backgrounds, you're going to have to steam them to get them to not have wrinkles, and they're kind of a pain in the butt. Pattern backgrounds work great. This is actually just some paneling from Home Depot, so it's kind of like a printed backdrop, but make sure your lighting, if you do anything that has a pattern on it, you can set up audio sync in OBS. That's something that I need to do a little bit better for this current setup. Other things you might want is some fake plants. If you're not skilled at hydroponics, like the last presenter, IKEA has some great fake plants that work great. This is also nice because I can use it to help me focus when I'm at the camera over there. I also really like to use clamps. Clamps are really nice. I have a bunch of them in here just for backdrops and things. And then the other thing that I like to use is this Stream Deck here helps me switch camera angles. So I can press these little buttons and it switches camera angles for me. And this is all hooked up through OBS as well. And it's a fun OLED keyboard thing, which is a cool toy. At the very last slide, I have the budget build as to what what you can build out. It's going to cost about $1,000, but you can get a pretty good sounding setup this way. So good luck. Thank you so much for watching the presentation. And like I said, if you have any other questions, hit me up on LinkedIn. I think I answered a few of them. Yeah, but if you want to hit me up with other questions, happy to answer them there.